these end users are demanding APIs. And when we start hooking AI up to it, I don't know if you saw
Yeah.
some of these charts from live, but basically, if you look at the API patterns to these systems, they're very spiky.
Yeah.
When somebody's doing something, it's very spiky. When you hook it up to an MCP, it's pegged almost all the time because it's going to use
Hmm.
every second of available compute to do something, gather information.
Chris Wade, welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Actually, really been looking forward to chatting with you. It's probably been a couple of years since we talked. I don't know, Chris. Was it like maybe before COVID or like during COVID? It's like it seems like it's been a while.
COVID warped my time, but probably right around that time, right before, right after, for sure.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, so how you been?
Good. Very busy. I think the market we'll talk about today is going through a lot of changes right now. ONUG with attaching to AI. There's just a lot of stuff going on. So a lot of people are trying to figure out the todays from the tomorrows, I think.
I think so. I'm really looking forward to our chat. But I think before we kind of just jump into things, one of the main purposes of these podcasts were to introduce people to other members of the community. And so let's give everyone a little bit of your background. So like, what's your career journey been, and what kind of brought you to like where you are today?
Cool. So, I guess education-wise, I have a computer science degree, so I think that's kind of well-informed, kind of a lot of what I did, and I focused in networking and databases. So I feel like my career journey is maybe a little bit straighter than I've heard. But my first job was with a company called Micromuse that built service assurance software.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you remember Micromuse, but fault management, discovery, a lot of assurance type tooling.
Yeah.
And then that business got sold to IBM and became part of the Tivoli suite. And I went to a solution provider in the assurance space. And then that company got bought by Alcatel-Lucent. So I spent 4 or 5 years doing that, running the OSS practice with a lot of third parties. So got a lot of understanding of kind of product market fit and what people are looking for from large scale deployments. And then about 2014, we saw networking really changing. So I was at ONF, I was participating in ODL, was kicking around the OpenFlow 1.4 spec for people that remember those days.
Yeah,
And,
I can remember them very well. Yeah.
Exactly. So we started Itential to really focus on the programmability aspect of that. So in the early days, we've used a lot of vernaculars, controllers, orchestrators, netconf protocols. A lot of people had different, ideas of where it was going to go with white box and other things. Our complete focus was on the ability to have programmability of networking infrastructure, just like we saw with compute and storage. So really, I guess career-wise, my first half of my career was really focused on the assurance side. I would say at some point, you feel like you're chasing alarms and telemetry issues, and wanted to be on the kind of the other side, the provisioning, activation, on purpose types of changes with the infrastructure.
Yeah, well, that's a great that's a great journey. Thanks for sharing. So, and also you're in Georgia, you're right?
I am. Yeah, most of our ecosystem in this business is Boston, Austin, and the Valley, right? So, interesting perspective, maybe being in an alternate city. But if I look out my window, we're right across the street from Georgia Tech.
I know. I was gonna say, like, I don't know, like you got Georgia Tech, like right there. It's like,
exactly.
That's like a black hole that sucks in a lot of really good talent.
Yeah, for a long time, Tech was exporting a lot of talent to Silicon Valley. I think they were proud they had the most computer science degrees in the Valley for a while. But with the distribution of private equity and company building, there's a lot more happening in Atlanta than maybe there was 10, 15 years ago.
Well, I think it's clearly been scattered. When you mentioned like Austin, we lost it in Boston. It's interesting too because in Boston, it was really AI that lost it for us, right? Because like MIT was really kind of driving our ecosystem around AI in the early 1990s, late 80s, early 1990s, and it was clearly decades too soon. And then just the exodus, and we missed the PC, era, and that really kind of went up. That was the impetus for computing to really kind of move out to the West Coast and really be rooted and grounded in Silicon Valley. It was going to be there anyway, but I think Boston was a really large tech hub, and I think we lost some of that, but it's really been biotech, now in our area. But Austin for sure has picked up, especially with COVID. We were talking about that a second ago. A lot of exodus out of California, into other areas, and in Georgia and Atlanta, you got great talent, there. You got great weather, also. So good ecosystem.
It's a
So
little hot this week, but otherwise, yeah.
yeah, well, it is. We are getting close to summer, summer,
For sure.
summertime. All right, so great. So let's chat about so Itential, and you've been focused on network automation, and it was interesting. Something that you said, spawned an idea. So when we started ONIG, that was back in 2012. That was really around kind of the whole OpenFlow stuff, and that's when you were probably doing that work with ONF, and and the programmability aspect of OpenFlow. Um, and I think so that was a little bit before its time, because now Sonic, has really actually we in the spring, like a couple of weeks ago in May in Dallas, we had our largest gathering of the community, and we had a large Sonic pavilion, and the enterprise markets is ready for it, and it's not just because of having an operating system and the white boxes, that entire promise, but now they're being packaged, and now there's a library of applications that you can use to run various different kind of lifecycle management, I guess tasks and workflows. So I think so. There's that one thing, but I think the more important thing that I think you mentioned was when we first started doing kind of white box, and kind of in computing, we were trying to do the programmability aspect of networking to kind of catch up to where storage and where computing has gone. And I think we're probably there now. Maybe we're still a little bit behind, but I think now the major focus is that we had storage and compute go to cloud, and now we're really now starting to focus on that within networking also with the NAS stuff, and even in the collaborative, the ONU collaborative, we launched it's called a WAN Connect API and working group. So it's defining an API, but what's more important is what that enables. It really enables kind of networking as services, But I digress. But the only point I'm making, Chris, and because you've kind of lived this now, is networking trailing behind major compute evolutions and storage evolutions. And so now we're kind of at this phase in networking where we both have both of these things interacting. We have kind of programmability, and we have AI as aiding and abetting in that process, and then we also have the beginnings of a different kind of market where you can consume networking more as a service than to actually build it all out yourself. So maybe let's take that as a potential, and your focus now on on the automation and the programmability aspect of network infrastructure.
Yeah. So some of the evolution, back in 2012 for sure, when you started, was, we were really using tools and EMSs. And the idea of making the network programmable is we were going to have new interfaces that, these were built for humans, tools, EMSs, CLI. It was
Mm-hmm.
very, and it's going to come full circle when you talk about AI and we start talking about putting stuff back into English for LLMs. But, these systems were largely built for humans. And the idea was that we needed machines to be able to activate networks. And so whether it was netconf or whether it was an ODL controller, the idea was we were going to have programmability. So we very much focused on integrating with these programmable constructs, mainly controllers. And I think there was a large push for a long time going from CLI to API,
Mm-hmm.
adopting controller infrastructure. And then something interesting happened in the sense that, I think I give the vendors a hard time quite a bit, but I think most have done a pretty good job with building programmable controllers. And then when they didn't have that, the DevOps community stepped in, namely Ansible and Terraform and Python to kind of augment.
Yeah.
So you kind of have these two worlds. You kind of have this very DevOps IAC type of world, and then you have this controller-centric programmable world where maybe a controller might look more like Zscaler or AWS, here in the near future, as you look at like Palo and some other people putting programmable access, and you have to marry these worlds up. So we didn't really go from CLI to API. We went from human-centric to programmable, but the ecosystem of technologies to make that happen, I don't think anybody would have guessed. But the amount of concentration has really, I think, helped the enterprise market, because now there's not 42 things to pick from. You kind of have a smaller ecosystem of things that you need to work with, which I think has really accelerated the adoption of kind of digitizing network operations.
Yeah, that does make sense. Because I think the main argument that I've kind of seen in this space was that, okay, well, do you kind of like roll your own with like, whether that's Ansible, Terraform, Python, or do you buy a platform, and then you kind of invest in that platform, and a lot I know in the ONU community, they went to build their own, and they regretted it, because all of a sudden they have to feed that beast, and they have to maintain it and keep it up and running all the time. And so some chose to move towards a platform, kind of an automation platform. So I'm not sure what you've seen, like in Itential's customer base, and and I'm not sure if there's a typical customer journey, but like maybe there's a, what's the dominant kind of path that you're seeing?
Yeah, I usually think history kind of influences how we behave today. So I think there was a long time when networking and network management vendors built very closed ecosystems. I'm trying to leave names of companies out, but you might have you might have a small inventory system, you might have a performance management tool, you might have this, that, and the other, and then you have a set of EMSs from your hardware vendors that aren't very API or programmable focus. So most organizations had to build a tools team to tie all this stuff together. So that's, that predates network programmability. So because the ecosystem hasn't had the most robust set of tooling, like if you look at the software developer, the tooling is unbelievable, right? I would just say for networking professionals, it was less than ideal, before programmability. So that's kind of baked into how we operate. And practitioners are solving problems. They might not be concerned with building a platform for the whole organization. They're trying to solve their challenges. So the DevOps community, I think, did a great job stepping in, providing libraries like NetMiko, Ansible modules, Terraform providers to give us programmable access to all this stuff, so we can build cool stuff. And then customers kind of have a decision. They're like, hey, do I abandon my stuff, or and to your point, do I buy a platform? And what we've tried to strike the balance is really have a developer-friendly platform that also provides a lot of out-of-the-box functionality. Usually when I talk to customers or prospects, they'll say, I built this part and I love it. Like I love that part. I had to build all this other stuff, and I wish I didn't have to maintain that anymore. So I tend to think it's less binary. Somebody might have built some business logic to roll out firewalls that they're super proud of, maps to their business processes, supports their vendors. Like, why not leverage that? There's no reason to throw that away. But I just view it through the lens of there is so much to do to digitize our infrastructure that organizations that adopt kind of an all of the above approach are the most successful. Because when we talk about automation, a lot of times we're talking about automation's very domain specific. So how I automate my data center, like if I pick up like Apstra or something, super awesome, but I can't use Apstra to manage my WAN per se. And the tooling in the cloud, you're not going to get Terraform out of a cloud SRE's hands unless they're using, CDK or something that's cloud specific. So automation being distributed like that, you want to use the right tool for the right job to help people solve their problems. The question for most organizations is, how do I take these islands of automation that I'm very proud of some and maybe others need help. How do I tie them together so that I can
Yeah.
share and take advantage of these things?
Yeah,
That's
what a great
yeah.
approach. That's such a real world, realistic, brownfield kind of like, approach. It's like it's kind of like both greenfield and brownfield, like, combining those together. Where others are really kind of like trying to make organizations make that choice, one versus the other. So yeah, congrats. So yeah, so I would think that message has to resonate really well, in the marketplace. It's like, you're right. There's like certain things that you put a lot of time and energy and effort in, that is, that you're really not only proud of, but it really works, and you don't want to lose it. But then there are other things that you're just so tired of feeding that beast, maintaining it. You love to give it up. So yeah, so if you can kind of marry those two worlds, that's a win-win. That's really great. Super.
Yeah. And the pressure on these organizations from like a governance and enterprise, whether it's managing secrets or GRC compliance issues or security
Hmm.
scans of their software, like these, we're really moving from a world of tooling where I use a tool to do my job on my desktop to
Yeah.
enterprise software that has to comply with all of the enterprise software requirements of the organization. And as people make that transition,
Mm.
that's really a point where they really evaluate how much they want to invest in different areas, tooling platforms, whether it's build or buy.
Yeah, that's well, no, that's yeah, really interesting. So that's great, kind of a transformation that you've been kind of like mapping, across the industry and across your customer base. What about so let's talk a little bit about now how AI now gets involved in this, in the automation, of infrastructure and its lifecycle management. So there's the orchestration automation, and then there's also just day to day, management. You were mentioning before, you can kind of chase alerts and alarms and logs and so forth, but that's also becoming automated. So now, I guess, what have you been thinking about how this is going to impact your product set, and how it may impact your customer base?
Yeah, things are moving fast. I think the Linux Foundation got A to A from Google yesterday. They gave it to the
Oh,
Linux
yeah.
Foundation like literally in the last 24 hours. So
Oh, they did. Yeah,
um,
that's well, good for them. That's an important piece in the whole agentic, journey.
exactly. So um, what we announced a little bit ago and our participation, I think in the first little bit, people were building chatbots and different ways of, hooking up LLMs to documentation and stuff, which is, innovative and interesting. But when we think about how to
Yeah,
apply this to the actual automation orchestration stack, MCP, I think kind of changed at least my perspective on what was possible,
yeah,
because we've been building around these APIs for the purpose of, like we've been talking about, programmability. And if you run an automation 50 times a day or 500 times a day, somebody might fill out a form, somebody might open a ServiceNow ticket. It's a very like discrete event. It's a
hmm,
very on purpose type of activity. Um, but if you start to think of like building, instead of services, you build capabilities and you expose them via an MCP. Now you're basically building a library of assets that the LLM can choose to use kind of at its choice, when it
hmm,
decides that's a good idea. So instead of building kind of large CRUD operations, you might build very small capabilities and let the LLM piece together what activities it wants to do. So the way we've talked about it is the workflow of today, and I mean workflow in the very generic sense, whether it's like a GitHub pipeline or whatever. The workflows of today are very static.
hmm,
And we think as we get to these MCPs, it's going to be very much a reasoned workflow. Um, but our participation is really taking all of the stuff we've built around automating components, orchestrating components, building the lifecycle of product and NAS services. But now, instead of just exposing them to the IT team or the application pipeline people, how
yeah,
about I expose it via an MCP to an LLM,
yeah,
and let it reason and decide what to do?
mm, yeah. Awesome.
And then
Yeah,
obviously people's first concerns are what is Gemini or whatever or my Llama model going to do on my network? So you
Well,
know.
there is that. The whole security people are like, like once they started hearing about agents talking to agents and a directory of agents, and where
Mhm.
the agents can consult other agents about doing jobs and distributing them. Yeah, that's like every hair on their back goes to their shirt. It's like yeah,
Yeah, so I think that's
but
that's that's where this will head, at least from our perspective, is that you are going to want to have discrete activities exposed to the MCP to basically constrain what activities you're going to allow. So you could
yeah,
imagine in the early days, maybe only giving it workflows that have read-only access, just making
mm,
like, hey, we're gonna, we have hundreds of changes in the network. We're gonna flow those through our standard change management process. We're gonna start off with letting the LLM have access to all the read-only activities. What's the status of this? How's this upgrade going? What's this product lifecycle? Why did this get turned off? Whatever's going on, um, so that we can start deciding what we want to feed it. And it very much mirrors when people first started talking about automating infrastructure. They wanted to do read-only things. They wanted to have human in the loop. I wanted
yeah,
checks and balances. I want to see the diff before you push it in the network. I want to see all these
yeah,
things. And I think that move from human to automated or API, we're going to see the same kind of human reaction, governance, and compliance requirements before we go from kind of API to a reasoned unknown outcome generated by the model.
yeah. It's like I think that the whole trust piece there is really going to be key, right? And I think maybe that process where we've kind of moved before, as we moved into automation, where there would be kind of checkpoints and guardrails, and human intervention to kind of check before you deploy maybe a new configuration and have a review, so either some review or have somebody kind of like in that loop. Maybe okay, organizations have learned that, and if we can kind of repeat on that, as you expose these libraries now via MCP to LLMs, and have a human kind of in the loop there. Maybe that's the path to building trust on these, and it does have kind of a ring of truth, associated with it, especially since we did it before when we had to build trust in the systems that, or the automation, kind of software that we were kind of leveraging and building at the time. Right. So is that kind of, do you see maybe another way in which trust gets built?
So, um, the models of today are generic. They consume the internet, they consume all publicly available repos, all that kind of stuff. Um, what what I believe will happen that will be transformational is that we will start getting specific agents with very specific knowledge. So I've been pushing, not that they listen to me, that equipment providers can provide kind of like a CCI in a box or a JNCIE in a box or a
Yeah.
Zscaler expert or an Arista validated design agent type of thing. And I think when I can ask via a flow, you know an agent that has all the knowledge of all the TAC tickets, all the best
Yeah.
configurations, all the validated designs, when I can trust that,
Yeah.
then I can start to interact in my workflow. So I
Yeah.
can ask today, I can ask it like, what's the risk of me making this change? It's going to give me a pretty interesting output, and I can put
Hmm.
that in the ticket for a human. But if my CCI agent knew the exact defects on the version I'm going to and understood the configs of my network and understood best practices related to EVPN deployments, you know, that I think that type of knowledge, having access to that type of knowledge is going to change, just like, and from a software development lifecycle perspective, whether it's the vibe coding stuff or Claude or whatever, the quality is of the point where people are starting to defer to it. So we
Yeah.
need we need we need some we need some agents that we trust technically, um, to answer those questions. And
Yeah. That'll be. Go ahead. I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry, to your point, it's the metaphors are all around us in the sense that we used to automate it off of spreadsheets, right? And then we automated off of
Yeah.
databases. And then the discovery of the networks went from discovering of devices to discovering. The fidelity of the discovery is so awesome these days that I will automate off
Mm.
of it where I would not in the past. So it's
Yeah.
really like the fidelity and the quality of the questions and answers I can get is going to be directly tied to the level of trust we can build within the organization.
Yeah.
Because obviously our desire is to move aggressively.
Yeah.
Because AI
Well,
AI at
that's,
its core is an extension of automation.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like, this is what I find really kind of refreshing is that when you've, not that I wouldn't have expected this, but you've thought it through, and you kind of embraced, these protocols, these agentic protocols that are coming out, and understand how they can be used, within your platform, and how your customers can benefit from them. So I think, it's like, it'll be interesting to see, if the large kind of networking suppliers actually deliver agents. I wonder how much of that will be conflicted, with their customer base. I wonder if it would just be required to, like, maybe third parties to start building those kinds of agents that have high level CCIE, kind of like backgrounds, or
Yeah.
that can really kind of learn the an environment, in detail, just looking at all the configurations, all the changes that have been made over some period of time, being able to understand, conflicts that may arise between one version of software and another version of software, or various different configuration changes, So that'll be really interesting to see that kind of entity, that kind of agent, come into the marketplace, because then you'll have kind of a group of these agents working within the flow. Um, you can almost imagine, like, once we build trust in these systems, they become highly automated, and it's almost like, it's like, Chris, like, our industry has been really good at, we build these really complex systems, and then there would be a company that gets started to try to manage that complexity, and so we built this one on top of the other, and so now if we are able to abstract that complexity with agents that are interacting, and that we trust and that really have a very deep knowledge of the infrastructure will get highly complex, but we might not even know it. More than likely, we just won't know it. The complexity gets totally masked with the automation.
Yeah. I mean, whether it's Google or otherwise, we usually talk about these very, very automated environments, and how impressive they are, which they completely are.
Mm.
Um, and then the question is, why can they do it and why everybody else can't? And a lot of times it's because they might refresh all their gear every 3 years, or they standardize their protocols, or they build their own OS, or whatever the anecdotes are. But I think we've really been challenged with abstractions. You use that word. From a computer science perspective, it's everything. So
Mm.
we've been abstracting human interfaces, and that's why I kind of keep coming back to that. That's why I thought 2014 was so pivotal, is we started looking at how we can build programmable infrastructure.
Yeah.
And if we solve the foundational programmability concept, then we can build amazing abstractions. We can build um, you know much more trustworthy systems, because when you build software on a human interface, that's been our generic struggle. I mean, the CLI was an amazing invention in the 90s, right?
Mm.
With a few strokes of a keyboard, I can program BGP across a very complicated network. But as we went to machines, the compute world has both the CLI and programmability, as we can talk about. But we need that programmability as a foundational component, and most of these other problems can be much simpler to solve. To your
Mm.
point, instead of trying to build complexity on complexity.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because, like, we have almost like kind of industries that are built upon that kind of model, or our industry, built upon that kind of model. You wonder, like, how many companies this will displace. Like the tooling, in particular, marketplace. So that's as we move more into this kind of agentic for infrastructure and lifecycle management, you would think that there would be some rationalization, of the market, and Yeah, I would think there would be some rationalization of this marketplace. It's like as we abstract all this stuff, and the agents are able to kind of deal with the complexity and manage the infrastructure. The need for kind of tools that try to reduce that complexity go away. It sounds obvious.
Yeah, well,
So
we focused on business logic and technical logic for a long time, right? How do I push this
mm,
config to this box, and which OS is it, and what does it support, and like
yeah,
super valid, complicated things. Um, but when you think about a future where you have a CCI agent sitting next to you, maybe your focus is on productizing your infrastructure, life cycling the components,
yeah.
the compliance and governance that's related to make sure that what we're doing falls in line with our business outcomes. It's definitely transformational, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's interesting too because like there's always like, and this has been a kind of an age, or kind of a long term, problem that maybe, yeah, I guess it is a problem in the industry is that IT in general speaks a very different language than business managers and kind of executive management. You know, so whenever there's like discussions, usually with IT, there's like, they're kind of, dazzle them with like science. It's like until like the board says, okay, whatever you need, not whatever you need, but okay, great. I don't totally understand it, but I trust you, and that you'll go off, and build that. So in this world, can you see that, that business logic informs a policy engine that informs the agents. And so, so now you have a much more direct link and tie into the business at hand. And it's not kind of constructing this infrastructure in support, of what you think the business needs, but now it actually could be directly from the business down, into the infrastructure around configurations and change management, new services, new products, a real focus on kind of service delivery in support of both customers and markets. So they're outside of the kind of the technical changes that we're talking about, there's got to be a bigger effect of having an automated infrastructure that gets its directions mostly from business logic and policy engines.
Yeah, I've been pretty impressed with the thinking over the past 18 months. And I think the result of that is that lines of business teams went directly to the cloud for a bit, right? So,
Mm,
this team builds their apps in AWS, they build their data lakes in GCP. And those app teams became very comfortable with the cloud operating model.
hmm
And you would hear silly stuff like, hey, we're just going to go all to the cloud and turn off our data centers and shut down IT and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And now we've gotten to a more balanced view, and the regulation and compliance requirements are pushing IT to take, greater responsibility of what was kind of shadow IT or whatever words you want to use in the lines of business. But those teams have a strong desire for a cloud operating model, which most of the time we can't offer internally.
Mm,
And I see two paradigms shaping up here. One is more of a shared understanding where the line of business team and IT work together to achieve an outcome.
mm,
To your
hmm
point, so maybe the business defines it in a policy engine, but everybody knows what's going on. So we have this super important app. I'm a transportation company where we're moving things around. We IT is providing some knowledge, business is providing policy. It's all tightly coupled. Um, I think that's interesting. I think that the most scalable way to do this is to have IT be a service provider, just like you got from AWS, in the sense that they provide componentry.
hmm
Like I go to AWS, I get load balancers and EC2 instances and storage arrays and stuff. And you let the business actually build their apps on top of your componentry, your capabilities that you expire. So that way, the app teams and infrastructure teams can kind of work independently. Just like AWS doesn't call me up when they do maintenance on my infrastructure, but if it's a tightly coupled stack, I might need to call my application friends and say, "Hey, I'm migrating you to a new F5. I need you to update your Terraform plans and republish your application." So the maturity really goes from, disconnected where line of business was doing their own thing. I really see it lining back up now, which is super exciting, in the sense that there's respect for the business outcomes that need to happen and all the compliance and governance that IT supplies. And now we're
Yeah.
thinking about how do we bring product thinking and product development into IT organizations to build these components that can be consumed by application teams. And that's
Yeah.
probably the more advanced customers we see.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it makes perfect sense. And I think that's only going to accelerate, as, we're very, very early on in the agentic, space, and how, what we've been focusing on and talking has been around just kind of the operations models and how to automate those, but there's also too, like most networks, at the last ONU, the concept of a data exchange really took hold. And so, because like so many in the community are pushing petabytes of data around, it's like, eBay is like, petabyte a day. FedEx every 30 minutes, a petabyte, is kind of moved around,
Yep.
their infrastructure. And so they're not thinking of the infrastructure as like, okay, I'm connecting this to that, this branch office to like this regional site, these desktops to like, this data center. They're starting to really just think of it more as a fabric, and where its main job is the movement of that data, and all of the rules associated with, okay, well, is that data allowed to move there? Is that user allowed to gain access to that data? So it's a very different kind of view of how they're kind of visualizing and starting to manage the infrastructure. And the other key thing of that too is um, how do we move that data around? So they don't want to abandon kind of routing, but it's like, does stateful kind of protocols really work in this new world, or do we need to go more stateless? And that kind of brings us almost like full circle, back to like, the whole OpenFlow and controller, pieces, because those were stateless, right? And so like you would have a controller that would create the path, and that controller would get informed by these agents around conditions on the ground, right? Whether there's congestion there or the path from point A to point B, what's the latency associated with it, what's the dollar cost associated, with it, what's the round trip time delay, with it, can that data move out of that country, or not? So there's a whole other kind of dimension of this outside of just the operations, the lifecycle management of it, but actually the movement of this data around. So I think, and it's interesting to see how they're they in thinking right now anyway, get married together, but we are still so early in this, and so much is going to change, around it, but it is moving fast. So you can't just like wait and just see how it all works out. You actually kind of have to jump in, just like you did with your products, right now, and how you're now kind of envisioning, how you expose this abstraction or expose some of your automation into like AI through MCP, and try to leverage the A to A, yeah, A to A
That's right.
protocols and so forth. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not sure if you've seen that like within your own customer base, like how the thinking around infrastructure is starting to change in terms of like what does it do, and how does it what is the value that it delivers? Because you were just talking about the cloud side of things. It's like when you have AI and you have cloud, it's all of a sudden like the patterns are very different. Processing, is different. Latency is different, and it's almost like the kind of networking is becoming inverted. In terms of like what we would normally expect networks to do and deliver. And so I think we're at like we're at a place right now in the industry where we're all starting to like reimagine. Um, what does this infrastructure kind of look like? What does it
Yep.
do, and how do we do it? And the value that it creates, for the organizations that we work for.
Yeah. So I think there's probably two things you said that I think are interesting to talk about for sure. Is A to A and the concept of AI I mean, we've seen this in the world, right? Is highly, highly concentrated. I saw a map the other day of like where the AI capable data centers are globally, highly concentrated. So what that means most likely is as we start to adopt this technology, it's going to be highly centralized. You know, you're going to have a strategy of where your training and inference models live. You know, one interesting way to think about it is how do you wire that up to your infrastructure? Like
Yeah.
how does that happen? And you know, people would have all sorts of comments of the honest answer is we don't know how it's going to happen. MCP is a great first step. Maybe it sticks. I hope it does. But how do you bring the data to your point, and how do I bring the capabilities and expose them in a controlled, trustworthy way? So that was one thing. And then I think admitting, I mean, I think everybody's admitting this, that, you know, this is going so fast that we're not sure where it's going to go. What that
Yeah.
tells me we need to do is we need to build small componentry that can be used in some interesting way in the future. And I think from a networking perspective, that doesn't feel natural to us. I think usually we want to go gather the requirements of the, you know, what sort of network do we need? We're doing a high frequency trading situation. I need this, that, and the other. And we go build the solution for that problem set.
Yeah.
If you think about though how the cloud folks build things, they build componentry, they build S3, they build EC2, and they're saying, go do something innovative with this. So when it comes to the data exchange and some of these other concepts, it's like we build, sometimes I say we like to build products nobody uses from a network services perspective. And when I ask people, why did we build this? They'll say, because I was trying to make it easy for the app team. I was trying to make it easy for the business. But the disconnect there is the business wants pieces that they can put together without the cycle of innovation that's required. So how do we build small componentry that can be consumed by MCPs or this future A to A interface? And how can I let my business stakeholders take advantage of that componentry and build what they want on top? And I think that product mindset and that cloud operating model are kind of like macro trends underpinning, you know, a lot of the stuff we're talking about today.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. It's almost like the movie "What About Bob?" You know, it's like baby steps, right? You
Yeah,
know, it's
exactly.
like do the do the componentry, you know, first, and then
Yeah.
you know, kind of baby steps into like you know what the new design will look like, you know, and then it you know it starts to build upon itself. Yeah, I think that's a as good approach as anything else. You know, right now as we start to try to think about how you know provide thought leadership around how you know others who are kind of like now operating these infrastructures kind of move forward. So
And,
yeah, I don't know, Chris, it's like you know one heck of a time, you know, in our industry. So where do you think, you know, maybe I want to come back to one thing that you said. You said you know very concentrated around AI data centers for sure, you know, but there's another thing too. Like if we extrapolate out like to like 2030. David Sachs did a really good job talking about this in one of the all-in-one podcasts, you know, where he was extrapolating, you know, kind of the growth rate of AI. So he talked about the models. He talked about the chips and also the data centers. And I think, you know, so you know, I've kind of listened to that, and then I kind of built the equation. And if you kind of map that out, like in 2030 or so, you know, we're looking at some AI data centers that are just absolutely friggin' massive. You know, whether they'll be at one location or a cluster of a group, you know, is to be seen. But, you know, we're talking between 5 and 10 million GPUs, you know, 10, 100, you know, gigawatts, you know, of power, maybe a terawatt if we can actually unleash, you know, kind of the power generation, you know, in the country. These are massive, massive compute centers, and you would think that no IT application will escape that, right? So it's either it's going to get sucked into that, you know, that capacity, or it's going to feed, you know, all these other, you know, kind of private, AI data centers. And so, I think there's this massive gravity that is going to be created, and then the other stat, you know, that was really kind of talked a lot about, you know, in Dallas, you know, at the summit, was the crossover of AI spending between hyperscalers and the enterprise will happen in the next few years. Where in 2030 there'll be more spending on in the enterprise on AI infrastructure than in the hyperscalers. So that basically says is that we are going to be in a hybrid world for the foreseeable future, and that we really need ways in which any of the thinking around infrastructure has got to be can't be isolated. That relying upon just hyperscalers for your AI, or only your own kind of infrastructure for AI. It's going to be a hybrid. It's so we have to start kind of factoring that into the thinking, as well. And so in our discussion on automation, how do you kind of bridge between that gap? It's like all the cloud providers have their own tools around automation. They don't really expose them; they kind of take care of them. So like in your work, has the Itential product set been mostly focused on the enterprise piece of it, or are there kind of extensions that you can have into the cloud providers?
Yeah. So some decisions we made early on were that we integrate with technologies, not vendors. So kind of the previous generation in our space would build like a Cisco driver, a Juniper driver, an Arista driver, and you kind of get in this like arms race
You're
or whatever you want
chasing
to
them
call
all
it.
the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I kind of learned
Yeah.
this with my time at Micromuse. I would say, no offense to my Micromuse friends out there, but we would spend half our
Mm.
R&D on all the integrations to HVAC units, 5 ESS
Oh,
switches, all sorts of stuff.
yeah.
And we had I think, an above average fault management platform, but we won because we had an integration to everything, like
Mm.
every possible device you have. So I could consolidate all of your alarming for root cause analysis across all of your infrastructure. That's how we won. And then there was kind of the same thing on the automation configuration management side in CCM market. Was you have a driver for all this stuff, and you're on this, like, you spend a significant portion of your R&D on building integrations, not building the best automation and orchestration platform. So it was tough at the time, but we decided we're going to integrate with technologies. So that's why things like ODL and NetConf were very
Mm.
interesting. TLF at the
Mm.
time, Ansible, Terraform, Python, and then controllers, Swagger specs, Open API, Graph APIs, these types of things.
Yeah.
So by doing that, we kind of don't understand the nuances of the technology we're integrating with. We're integrating at an interface level versus a specific box level. So I say that background to say that, like, as these new technologies come out, they have programmable infrastructure. So it's very natural for us to be kind of domain agnostic in how we attack these problems. So we're just as happy with VPCs and security groups as we are EVPNs in the data center. And I think that's
Mm.
how most enterprise IT organizations want to think about it. Is they want a strong set of capabilities that they can expose to their application teams as a set
Yeah.
of products. And those business owners are probably less concerned with the vendor you chose, or the 5,000 capabilities it has. It's more of like, to do load balancing at this pharmaceutical company or this insurance company, this is how we expose it so we can get mass, the business benefit. And the productization of either the AI data centers or these capabilities should follow a very similar path, which is
Yeah.
really this whole path of programmability, domain-based automation, tying it together, and then building products for somebody else to consume through automation,
Mm.
which is something else we haven't talked about. But like, for a long time, we expose things in tickets and forms. These end users are demanding APIs, and when we start hooking AI up to it, I don't know if you saw
Yeah.
some of these charts from live, but basically, if you look at the API patterns to these systems, they're very spiky.
Yeah.
When somebody's doing something, it's very spiky. When you hook it up to an MCP, it's pegged almost all the time because it's going to use
Mm.
every second of available compute to do something, gather information. So
Mm.
the systems that we have, if they're brittle, if they, aren't wired into scale and other things, as soon as you hook it into the MCP, the power, like,
Yeah.
so,
Mm.
the other interesting thing is the focus on these amazing AI innovations are actually doubling down the requirements of kind of the core enterprise software, authorization models,
Mm.
secrets management, auditing and logging, traceability through the systems, kind of these core platformy features, I think become even more important as we start to unleash, um, you know, digital agents doing what they see fit.
Yeah.
with the guardrails we provide.
Yeah, Chris, awesome. I want to kind of like, we're getting close to end of time.
Sure.
I thought maybe what might be good to end on is kind of a future and a vision. So it seems like, what Itential is really focused on is exposing, when automating the infrastructure, but also exposing it to whether those are development teams, and now to LLMs through MCP. And there may be one or two other ways in which you're exposing, kind of that automation and the infrastructure too. So, how do you see this industry moving over the next couple of years? Like, what's your extrapolation? If we look back and it's 2030, what do we see?
Sure. I mean, I think every day that goes by, networking resembles compute and storage more than a unique bespoke set of infrastructure.
Hmm.
So I think the trend towards networking, probably said programmability too many times on this call, but the ability to treat it like a computer storage instance. Obviously, it's a super complicated distributed systems. Mad respect for what's going on underneath the covers, but from a user perspective, the more we can make it universal. And I think you're seeing this with acquisitions in the macro sense of equipment providers. If we look at the types of companies they're purchasing and the investment profile of what they're doing, I think networking starts to look a little bit more like infrastructure. We saw this with kind of the hybrid, what do you call them, the like the Nutanixes of the world that start smashing everything together. I think we start to see more of that kind of on a macro scale. And then, how do we expose this infrastructure to these agents? And then how do we build products for our business owners? I think maybe that's only a couple years away, but I think
That seems to be
that's the
pretty
core
close.
focus. A lot of the other stuff is noise. I think that's the North Star that we need to be driving towards.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Chris, hey, thanks so much. This was actually a lot of fun. I learned a lot, also, especially about your focus and your background also, but also the kind of like what you're guiding you and the decisions that you're making on products for your customers at Itential. So thanks so much for the time, Chris.
Absolutely. Thank you. Very exciting times.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Thanks
Cheers.
everyone for watching.